Hello everyone, we are today at the Panzermuseum Munster and we look at the Schwimmwagen.
Or swimming car in English.
The official name is VW Type 166 and in Wehrmacht service it was called the Kfz-1/20, which means basically car 1/20, and it's based on the Type 82 VW, better known as the Kübelwagen, the bucket car, which was the Kfz-1, so basically in the terminology it's derived to that. About 14,000 of this vehicle were produced from 1942 to 1944, and basically production stopped in August 44 when the major manufacturing plant was bombed heavily and then it was not used anymore. Let's take a look inside. So we are here with the steering wheel, and that nobody steals it. Here it's secured. So basically in this car you have two levers and not one. You have one for the gear shift, and you have one which is called the lever A, Hebel A. And the first is Hinterradantrieb, which means steering, rear steering or rear powered. Then you have the four-wheel drive, and then you have a special cross-country gear as well. So, and you would switch this from the basic operation would be rear powered, then you could switch to four-wheel drive, and then if you switch to the cross-country drive, you would have less revolutions per minute but more power behind it, so that you have better chance to cross something. For the gears, we have 4 regular gears and 1 reverse gear. And here, as you can see, the information here is very limited. We basically only have a speed and a distance indicator as well. And here, of course, we have clutch, brake and speed. So here you can see the lever A to change the different drive modes. And here we have the gear shift. And there in the front you see the right side fuel tank with 25 liters, and there should be another one over here. But of course it's harder to see. And notice there are no doors in here, which I mean would be a leakage problem, so you get in or outside by just climbing over. So here you can fixate one rifle. You have one on the other side as well. Here you would put the rifle butt, and here would be the rifle outside, and then you can, it's secured for driving, so for the back passengers, a very nice and easy solution. So here at the front we have a spare wheel, one fuel tank with 25 liters, another fuel tank with 25 liters, and here we have a license plate, which is interesting because, particularly if we look at the rear, because there is one argument for some people why this was a replacement for the motorcycles, although some people disagree. Here we have a spade, and here we have the technical data. So the official name was Kfz K2S, the S for Schwimmwagen, and it's the empty weight and what it could carry, and also the vehicle class. Now here's the pedal. That's very important, because this was not only used if the drive was not working in the water, but also because it couldn't drive rearwards or swim rearwards. So if you wanted to go backwards in the water, you had to use the pedal. So the engine is located in the back. I guess, yeah, there's not much to see here, I think. Here at the back you can see the propeller that was used and how it would be put on that you can drive in the water. So how would you deploy this propeller, more or less? You would of course open the ladder strap here, and then you mount it on this connection back here. But this thing is very interesting. This you would use and then to hook in here and then pull it up again, so that once this is in the water you can have, like, it's more easier to pull out. You don't have to grapple it down with your hand. And this is interesting. So here we have the convoy light, which basically at a certain distance these two lights would merge into one. So you knew when you saw both that you were at the right distance. And here this is one of the arguments for people that this was intended as a replacement for the motorcycles, because apparently, according at least to the Access History forum post, this size of vehicle plate was only used on motorcycles and not on other Wehrmacht cars. The question is, what might be the reason for this? One could also argue because this vehicle with the space like here, everything is rounded, that you don't want to put a plate, a white plate, because it doesn't fit, in particular not there as well. Or that you had wanted to have a certain overlap in parts, and that it might be circumstantial and not like intended. The thing is, even the official Volkswagen homepage calls it the Kradschützenwagen. Kradschützen is motorcycle rifleman car. The question is if this was really the case, because again, as the original document I cite notes, it was intended for the combat engineers, which again, ultimately it seems was not used very much. Now, in terms of armament, we have two mounts, but basically where you could put a machine gun with a proper adapter. The one is here at the back. The forward mount would be here. Of course, in that case, unless you want to really limit where you're firing, you would put in the windscreen where you fix it down here. And then you had basically quite a wide arc of fire forward.
Let us take a look at the text of the initial request from 18th June 1940. The Army High Command, Chief of the Armament and Command of the Reserve Army Motor Vehicle and Motorization Department requests that the possibility of developing an off-road amphibious vehicle based on the four-wheel drive Volkswagen to be investigated. The vehicle is to be used primarily by engineers, etc., and is urgently required by this arm. The following information can be provided for the time being. Fully off-road capable passenger car, maximum speed 80 km per hour, climbing ability like a four-wheel drive Volkswagen, propulsion in water with propeller, speed in water at least 10 km per hour, steering in the water via the wheel discs of the steered front wheels. At least the same load capacity in water as on land. Entry doors, etc. are not required. Transition from land to water travel without leaving the vehicle. Army High Command, Chief of Armament and Command of the Reserve Army Vehicle and Motorization Department would be grateful if Dr. Porsche Company could provide a statement on the development process as soon as possible. The project must be kept secret for the time being. This is particularly interesting since some sources note that the vehicle was originally planned as Kradschützenwagen, motorcycle rifleman vehicle. Those sources note that the main goal was to use the Schwimmwagen for armored recon and motorized, mechanized infantry units, while the cited source above states it was intended for the engineers. Although, as someone on the Access History forum pointed out, there are two aspects about the Schwimmwagen that indicate a connection to the motorcycle replacement. First, no no-take nightlight was used, like with the motorcycles, and second, the license plates holders size was smaller than for regular military cars. The size was the same as those for the motorcycle license plates. Yet someone pointed out that this could be just a coincidence, and I agree that these two aspects are not strong indicators. I also searched German military archives for Kradschützenwagen and Schwimmwagen. The first yielded no results, the second just one. But that document is from November 1942, so shortly after its introduction, and it's called Schwimmwagen. The claim that the Schwimmwagen was intended as a replacement for the motorcycles of the Kradschützen seems odd to me, since the Kübelwagen could already fulfill that role and was far less complicated. The Schwimmwagen was basically an upgraded Kübelwagen with a four-wheel drive and amphibious capability that was more expensive and complicated. Unless I missed something, the Schwimmwagen does not offer any capability that are similar to the motorcycle that are not already covered by the Kübelwagen. We know that the Schwimmwagen was used for recon duties and transport infantry later on. As such, I suspect that the later use and the original intention are mixed up by various authors. Before we continue, the visit to the Panzermuseum and this video was made possible by my Patreon and subscriber supporters. Sadly, due to major changes over the last months, I had become far more dependent on your support than ever before. You guys are keeping the channels going. If you like what I do and want me to continue doing it here on YouTube, thank you for considering supporting me on Patreon or Subscribestar. Links in the description. Yet, let's move on.
Now let's look at the development history. The original requirement was basically stated around July 1940, and the first trial was done in November 1940. Initially, the first type of vehicle was called the Type 128. It had a larger hull and it turned out to be unstable, so it was shortened to the Type 166, which you have here, which then was tested in August 1941, and finally in summer 1942 it went into mass production. So in terms of technical data, this vehicle had a 24.5 horsepower engine and the empty weight was 910 kilograms, which is about 2,000 pounds. The maximum weight was 1,345 kilograms, which is about almost 3,000 pounds. Now, since it was an amphibious vehicle, I mean, it's a Schwimmwagen, basically is the swim car, it had a water speed of 10 kilometers per hour, and on the road it had 80 kilometers per hour.
We also have a trial report for driving in a swamp from September 1942. Various driving tests were carried out in a swamp selected by senior civil engineer Suchantka, which roughly corresponds to the banks of the African rivers. Driving through swampy terrain with so-called bottomless ground is an almost insurmountable problem for the vehicles of any kind, caterpillar, wheel drive, but it can be said, and this was demonstrated in the driving test, that the Type 0.166 with its low weight, high gear ratio, smooth underbody and large 200/12 tires offers the most favorable application even on this type of terrain. When driving into the swamp, which leads from soft ground through reeds and climbing plants into a dirty pond, the car got stuck after about 10 to 12 meters due to the wheels slipping. Using a 20-meter long hemp rope is far better than wire rope for this purpose, the car was pulled ashore by 3 men running alongside the spinning wheels. The car sank partially to the freeboard height. Snow chains do not help. Pushing with the oar carried in the car can be a good aid. For short trips into and out of the swamp, boards laid on the top are sufficient. Low tire pressure is recommended.
Now, how was this used in wartime? Well, according to some sources, this type of vehicle was shipped to nearly all types of divisions, although it was mainly focused on recon units, so I doubt that static infantry divisions got it, and maybe even regular infantry divisions only to a limited degree. One problem is, if we look at the KSDN, the Kriegsstärkennachweisung, which is basically the German table of organization and equipment, they are very general. They say like motor vehicle, and then they say like regular motor vehicle, handelsüblich, so basically this was a civilian vehicle, or they say it's capable of cross-country capability or something. And I found some KSDN from 1943 where these vehicles are specifically mentioned, but usually only 1 or 2, very low numbers, and for very specialized units. So they were generally probably used and replaced complete Kübelwagen units or other elements. Now, generally they were used as transport and courier vehicles. And I also found a report from the Organisationsabteilung, the organization department, from August 1943, and they stated the problem is they are quite leaky, and in overall the Kübelwagen, so which is derived from, is better because the Kübelwagen has less weight, so if it gets stuck, it can be pulled out more easily, and other elements. Generally, it seems the vehicle was mostly issued to Panzergrenadier units, and here for the recon units again. And the question is, of course, was it used amphibiously, so in amphibious combat duty or something? And the answer to this seems to be mostly no. And you at first think, why? And then if you look closer, it makes sense. This thing is not armored. So basically, and it has a speed of 10 kilometers per hour on water at best. So this means a lake where nothing is moving. So you don't go across a current or something, and which is about 6 miles per hour. So also it was not majorly armed with something, and you're basically a sitting duck in the water. So an opposed landing or something was probably completely out of question. Of course, it probably was quite often used behind the front lines, because let's say it is fun to drive a vehicle that can move on water and where it's also rather safe, and also maybe, for instance, crossing a river behind the lines for courier duty as well. To summarize, the Schwimmwagen was an adapted version of the farmer-produced Kübelwagen, which was a very simple German car but very effective. Keep in mind that this was an amphibious car in more of a civilian sense, and not in the military sense. So you couldn't use it basically if you were engaged by fire because it was not armored, and generally people were not, and it was also rather slow on water. Now what is very interesting, since this vehicle was also more expensive than the regular Kübelwagen, is that it was still produced in very large numbers, or relatively large numbers, 14,000 in comparison to 50,000 to the more simple Kübelwagen. And that is probably why after the bombing of the manufacturing plant it was also discontinued, because the use was probably limited to a certain degree. Now there's also the general, many sources claim that this vehicle was built to replace motorcycles. And as mentioned, there's quite a discussion going on, but the current evidence, at least from the requirements, we know that this was not the case. Originally, it was a car intended for use by combat engineers and also not by recon units, as it was later turned out to be. Big thank you here to the Panzermuseum Monster for inviting me. Thank you to my supporters on Patreon and Subscribe Stuff. Thank you for Tobias for holding the light, and Andy for being behind the camera. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.
Oh, the Schwimmwagen is on fire.
Yeah, the Bismarck is sinking. Let's get out of here. Okay. What is a good way to not damage anything and not to hurt myself? Oh. Okay.